Libya right now, state television has broadcast an appearance by Muammar Gaddafi. He addressed crowds of supporters in Tripoli's Green Square, another brief appearance by the Libyan leader. His forces, meanwhile, have retaken the town of Bin Jawad in the centre of the country, but rebel fighters have held positions close to the capital and in cities and towns in the east. Several British Special Forces soldiers have been released in eastern Libya. The UK is still insisting it only had diplomats in the area, though. Hod Abdulhamid's been following that story.
It's very difficult for anyone here to believe that these 8 British nationals were actually on a diplomatic mission, for the simple reason that they landed in the middle of the night by helicopter in a little town south of Benghazi. They had with them a whole lot of equipment, according to our sources: computers, maps, weapons and explosives. They were immediately intercepted by rebels and the residents of that area and handed over to authorities in Benghazi. Now, the National Council here in Benghazi says it had no idea that these 8 British nationals were on Libyan soil until they were handed over. They said that no one had told them about a diplomatic mission coming into the country.
The way they came in was inappropriate. They came into the country in the wrong way. We arrested them as soon as they touched the Libyan soil. For someone to just come in like that through the air without any permission or prior agreement is out of order. I mean, we have a state and we have a sovereignty. We have sovereignty over our borders, land, air and sea. Anybody who wants to come in must obtain a permission. I mean, how can this be a delegation of diplomats and come in this manner? We completely reject this.
They do raise the question that if they were really a diplomatic mission, why didn't they come through the normal route, and that will be through the Egyptian border with Libya. The National Council did say that at this stage it did not want to have any kind of international diplomatic row, so it handed them over to British authorities as quick as it could.
Well, around the world, dozens of Libyan diplomatic staff are now backing the rebels. One of those is Ali Arishi, a former Libyan minister currently in the United States. Shihab Ratanzi spoke to him in Washington.
When I announced my defection or resignation, as we may call it, from the regime, I called upon all ambassadors and diplomats to do the same, to announce their absolute and final independence from the regime, but to maintain their positions in ways that will serve the interests of the Libyan people and express the will of the Libyan people, which is, there is now a consensus of regime change. Now people were in limbo because they were representing this vague thing from a diplomatic point of view, which we call the will of the Libyan people, which is the revolution of February 17th. Now there is no longer ambiguity. You are either representing the legitimate representative of the Libyan people, which is the council, or you still swear an allegiance to a terrorist organization that disguises itself as a government.
And we'll get on to the implications for the Libyan diplomatic community in a moment, the international community. But as far as this council is concerned, then it really is just a reaction to events of the last 3 weeks. There weren't any long-held plans for such a council. There was no framework or structure that had been held in place in the event that Gaddafi would be in this position?
Well, let me put it this way. We were surprised by our success. It was all sudden, that this kind of regime has a formidable terrorist organization, and they are ruthless. They have a lot of money to buy a lot of favors, and here are committed young people who decided that enough is enough, and they were willing to put their lives on the line for the cause of freedom, justice, the rule of law, and so on.
The Italian Coast Guard says hundreds of Tunisian migrants are continuing to come ashore on the island of Lampedusa. More than 150 arrived early on Monday morning, and authorities reported seeing at least another 8 boats on the way. More than 100 also arrived on Sunday after conditions in the Mediterranean improved. The island only has room, though, to process 800 immigrants, but since the troubles in North Africa began, more than 7,000 Tunisians have sailed to that Italian island. Saudi Arabia is reportedly building up its security forces in the eastern part of the country. It comes in response to protests there calling for more rights for Shia Muslims. New video posted on a social media website appears to show a protest in Qatif on Friday. On Saturday, the Interior Minister banned all demonstrations in the kingdom. Well, Saudi Arabia's ruling family wants to avoid scenes like those in neighbouring Bahrain. There, Shias have been holding mass rallies against the Sunni royal family. Protesters have been camped out at Pearl Roundabout since last month. They've won only minor concessions since then. So on Sunday, hundreds took their campaign to the Gudaibiya Palace, the Prime Minister's residence. A correspondent in Bahrain, who we're not naming for his safety, has this report.
Calling for the overthrow of Bahrain's ruler, King Hamad. They're headed for Pearl Roundabout. It's been occupied by pro-democracy protesters for nearly 3 weeks. Shia opposition figures say that after years of repression and the killing of 7 protesters last month, it's time for change. Sunday started with a demonstration outside the palace where weekly cabinet meetings happen. Sunni and Shia leaders denounced the Prime Minister, the King's uncle, who's been in power for over 4 decades. And they called for foreigners given jobs in the security forces to be expelled from the country, saying the majority Shia population here is being squeezed out of public sector jobs. Hours later, the government reiterated people's right to freedom of expression, but everyone's waiting to see if they offer real concessions.
The government is, they've called for a dialogue with opposition parties and most of civic society to reach some sort of a compromise towards, some sort of a constitutional democracy.
The previous announcement of 20,000 new government jobs has done nothing to quell the anger on the streets. What's not clear is how long the protests will continue and whether the security forces will continue to keep their distance. AlJazeera, Manama.
Now, a court in Indonesia has rejected a Muslim cleric's statement in his defence on terror charges. Abu Bakar Bashir, the spiritual leader of the Jemaah Islamiyah group, says he wasn't involved in a paramilitary training camp. Prosecutors accuse him of funding such a camp in Aceh province and planning to use weapons to commit terror attacks. Bashir's been acquitted twice on terror charges, but if convicted this time, he will face the death penalty. Afghanistan's President Hamid Karzai has rejected a US apology for the killing of 9 Afghan boys in a NATO airstrike last week. Hundreds of protesters were on the streets of Kabul on Sunday to demonstrate against US military operations. Karzai's told the commander of coalition forces that civilian deaths in his country are no longer acceptable. And US Defense Secretary Robert Gates has arrived in Afghanistan. His visit comes as US troops prepare to begin a phased withdrawal due to happen in July. President Hamid Karzai due to announce a timetable for the gradual handover of security responsibility from NATO to Afghans. In France, an opinion poll in Le Parisien newspaper suggests the leader of the far-right National Front Party could win the first round of next year's presidential election. Charlie Angela has more on that.
The face of France's far-right politics. Marine Le Pen replaced her father Jean-Marie as leader of the National Front Party just 2 months ago. France's next presidential election is approaching, and now a poll published in Paris's leading newspaper is making uneasy reading for President Nicolas Sarkozy. It suggests that if the